Hello everyone, Yaron here from Ocean Swift Porphyra, and in this video I would like to showcase and give an overview of our Synth hybrid engine sampler plugin for Kontakt called Porphyra Hybrid. Now this is truly in many ways a kind of state-of-the-art instrument. It utilizes many new Kontakt features, things that were not possible to do before. Now they are possible, and we have incorporated these things into our instrument. I don't know, I don't assume that many of you that are watching this video know this, but I was the product manager in the Kontakt team at Native Instruments, and one of the last things that I did before transitioning from Native Instruments back to Ocean Swift was work on a bunch of these Kontakt engine features that you see in these instruments. So I can say that a lot of my blood is actually in this instrument beyond just building this instrument really deeply into the Kontakt engine. One quick disclaimer, if you're looking for sound examples and really like, yeah, how does this thing sound like, what kind of presets and what can it do sonically, look at some of the other videos. In this video I will be talking and I will be giving just an overview. So if that's not for you, you're looking for the sounds, look at the bottom of this video and I will share all the links to all the sound examples and all of that. Okay, so let's get to it. So you heard me say that we say it's a hybrid engine and it's cutting edge and blah, blah, blah and all that. What does that really mean? So first of all, on the surface, yeah, it might just look like any other synth. You see familiar controls. But what we have here is two asymmetrical layers. Layer A, you can really clearly see it on the interface. Layer A is the wavetable layer. Layer B is the sample layer. And the main kind of premise of this instrument really starts with the way these two instruments are mixed. So you have this beautiful central big mix button with a beautiful animation. And yeah, now it's connected now here to my mod wheel, and basically you can mix those two layers, those two engines. And the beauty of this instrument and the uniqueness comes with actually this design of having these two individual layers and having all this sonic capability and kind of sounds that come with these two layers and the way they blend in together. So maybe let's start looking layer by layer, and then let's look at the signal flow, and then let's look at the effects and the options and everything that goes after basically the synthesis. So as I mentioned, layer A and layer B, let's go into layer A, the wavetable. So the first thing that you see is that you have a really kind of nice display here where you can see the wavetable you're working with. You can click and drag it and kind of have your own 3D representation on some certain level. Or you can actually click on it and go into a sort of kind of, you can center it, you see. And it toggles actually 2D and 3D mode. So if I'm in 2D mode right now and I'm moving between the wavetables, you can see that the selected cycle within the wavetable is actually shown only that cycle. If I now click on it and kind of drag it, and you can see that I morph in a 3D kind of way. So this is just a display. By the way, all this information, the way we did the synth, we kind of took really the time. You can see on the bottom over here on the info layer, if I hover over something, it really gives you all this information. So if I look here now at the bottom, it says displays the loaded wavetable, single cycles always display in 2D mode, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to get into like really the specifics of where to click and stuff like that beyond what I just showed. All the information is just down here on the info pane. We try to be very clear and very precise in this information. So why I did want to show this kind of wavetable view is because there are two kind of main let's say sample selections here, types in the wavetable. The first type is single cycles. And you notice that when I went to single cycle, I can no longer click here. There is no 3D mode because the actual loaded sample file is a single cycle. And if we kind of go here and start looking, we see that we have a bunch of stuff, sine, triangle, and saw, and square, and the basic things. But then it gets a little bit more funky. So we have all these sort of FM single cycles and really just tons and tons of stuff already in the single cycles. I think, yeah, you can scroll and you see that there's really a lot to select from. So yeah, beyond just even FM, so like additive sort of signs added up and like maybe downsampled sort of samples and more kind of cycles that really come from like I don't know, like resynthesizing some organic thing. So maybe something, well, I don't really have I don't know, maybe let's go into an absolute preset and we can, so I don't know, let's take, so really kind of basic things, but a lot of them have a lot of character. So you can really scroll through this selection and you have those single cycles. One thing I do want to already show on the other side, so if we go all the way to the sample side really quickly, there's a lot of other stuff to show, and really the selection is quite different from what you can do with the wavetable side. But the one category that is the same between both layers is the cycle category. So you have the exact same list of cycles that you have over here, you have the same over here. It just kind of gives you a little bit of flexibility. Of course, it's still a little bit different because this one is still playing those samples from a certain engine, from the wavetable engine, and this is playing it from a certain different engine, the sample engine. So they are identical samples, but they are presented a little bit differently, and they are not in perfect phase or anything. So you kind of, yeah, you get a little bit of a interesting texture just by mixing even the same one, but from the two different layers, because it's a little bit of different engine that produces these sounds. Very similar. I'm not saying that a saw is a saw in the end, right? But just saying that it's coming from different engines, and the manipulation of that saw can be different. That's also part of the point. So anyway, let's go back to the wavetable layer for a second. So you have all these single cycles. You saw me scroll also using those arrows. It's kind of self-explanatory. One other thing that I would like to quickly show before we go into the tables and stuff, just let's finish this top area for a minute, is that beyond just mixing them, you also have individual gain controls for each layer. Now this could be important where you have, when you're mixing also the sample layer, and you see that you kind of want a little bit of kind of just to control the RMS a little bit, you know what I mean? That that things blend correctly, that you can really smoothly, let's say, if you scroll the main mix knob, you still don't get like really huge volume discrepancies, whatever you synthesized, right? So you can kind of have more fine control. In a lot of cases, maybe you don't need to touch this gain knob, but it's there to help you out. You will see that some snapshots kind of go a little bit like this, maybe on one layer. Obviously, you won't see them go like this. You can, if you want, obviously. All right, so let's go back to the wavetable, and we looked at the cycles, but the more interesting, and wait, maybe I didn't say that correctly. I was going to say that the more interesting thing is the tables, but I actually enjoy also working a lot with the single cycles. There's a lot of power to be had here. I mean, it's just like any other polyphonic synth that plays an oscillator, basically, and you have tons of shapes for this oscillator, so look at it that way. But if we go over and change to the table, then it starts to get even more interesting, because first of all, you have tons of wavetables, not just that you had all these wave cycles, and they're all kind of interesting in their own way, you know, and it's really nice with the 3D view that you can also see what is going on if you morph them. Notice that if I go to the cycle, the morph knob is also not available. There's nothing to morph, so it doesn't make sense. But here it does make sense, and you can see really really the uniqueness of each wavetable. There's a lot of really cool, just different shapes. Some of them are quite geometric. Some of them are really simple. So here we have a sine to triangle, and then we have a sine to a square, sine to saw. But then we have like this one. It even says no morph, so it's not intended to be morphed with an LFO, but it's a collection of tons of shapes in one table. And each one of these actually has 100 unique tables, but of course you see that the percentage, morph percentage, you also have all these in-between spots. So again, with all these basically hundreds of shapes that you can achieve either with a cycle or with the table. Now this morph knob, maybe it's a good time to also really quickly jump into the modulations, because a lot of these things here can be obviously modulated. And one of the ways to modulate the morph knob, for example, would be with an envelope or with an LFO. So if I quickly jump, we have an amp and a filter envelope. Let's talk about their controls in a second. But just to show that the mod envelope, it can be routed to a bunch of destinations over here on the wavetable, one of them being the morph, and then the depth can be controlled bipolar. So you can, for example, I don't know, you place the morph here, and then using the depth, you decide which way the morph knob modulates. So it's quite flexible. And the same with the LFOs. So you have here these LFOs. We'll talk about them in a minute, but just to show that one of the destinations can be the wavetable morph and other destinations on the wavetable. So by doing this, kind of morphing it in real time, let's see if we have an example. I mean, there should be tons of examples actually. So we can actually have a look. Let's see. Right, we found one. So this guy over here, for example, as it's played, the wavetable is morphing. That is actually not shown graphically. There's a reason for that, because you can also kind of morph it really fast with the LFOs, and it wouldn't make sense for the screen to jump around. But a lot of sonic character can be had. You know, the wave can, let's say you see here, it starts on something really, really skinny, and then gets into something like a saw somewhere, and then it looks like something more additive and gnarly, and maybe with some FM and harmonics. So you can start a certain way, and then as you play, the sound can evolve. This is a really, really powerful way to get evolving sounds, either with the envelope or with the LFO as appropriate. Anyways, moving on, you can control the start phase. I guess, I don't know if there's yeah, you can see it on a square, kind of really clearly. You can control phase randomization, which will just start a little bit of a give a little bit of a randomization to the phase with each note. It kind of maybe helps make polyphonic notes a little bit more cleaner and not overlapping. And if you play like really fast, so with each new note, you will get a little bit of a randomization on the phase. Another way you can modulate, and maybe it's good that we are on a sort of square here, we can also do it with a cycle. So maybe let's grab a square, and we can control, well, let's go back to the phase. We can control, this is the width. So this is kind of, let's say your very standard pulse width, that when we do it on a square, so very standard pulse width modulation, which you can control also with an LFO, as we see here, but it's not just on squares. That's what's interesting. So you can do that basically to any of the waveforms. How interesting and how useful that is up to you. It really depends on what you're trying to do with the sound. The effect sounds similar on other waveforms as it sounds on pulse width modulation, whereas as you go narrower, the sound becomes quite narrow. Maybe we can check it with an example. But you also get these sort of overtones that are happening because of the way that now the wavetable processes this wave, which is very short. So even just using the width, a sine can turn into something with many more overtones, can sound somewhat like a saw. So you can even connect this, we will show a little bit later, to external modulation and control it like that, or you can even control it with an LFO. Maybe let's do that really quickly. So I'm going to one of the LFOs. I'm on number 4 here. So it's quite interesting. I mean, we started with basically just a sine over here, right? And we already can do a lot of interesting tonal sound design just by using the width, which is a sine width in our case here. Moving on, we have a very interesting parameter here called Inharmonic. Turning this on and off, actually, it uses a little bit more CPU, so depending on your setup and how heavy you feel that this is, you can turn it on or off. And also if you're just not using it, just turn it off to conserve a little bit. It is bipolar, so the Inharmonic can go both ways. And what Inharmonic basically does is it's a built-in oscillator that basically adds like it's sort of a detuned oscillator in relation to the original, but there's a lot of DSP going on behind the scenes. It affects also the core oscillator. And yeah, it adds a lot of inharmonics and overtones to the sound, with the interesting thing being if it's on 100, so if you go higher, these are higher harmonics than the original sound, and if you go lower, they are lower harmonics than the original sound. And if you go all the way up on 100%, it's a full octave above. So you will actually hear that the overtones are a full octave above. And if you go minus 100%, it will be a full octave below. But anything in between will produce kind of sort of inharmonic overtones. It's super useful for creating all sorts of sounds. And you can also, of course, modulate this, again, also with the envelope and with the LFOs. And with external modulation. Let's show all the external modulation together a bit later. So it's super interesting. One thing to note about this Inharmonic is it doesn't just detune. It doesn't just take the oscillator and detune it. Like I said, there's a lot of DSP involved behind the scenes. So if I do it on a sine wave, wait, we're not hearing. We're hearing this. So if there's a sine wave, you see there's nothing happening, because there are no overtones to begin with. You need to use something that has overtones to begin with. So if I do it now on a saw, this is the basic saw, or lower, or higher. And now if I start adding the Inharmonic, listen to what it does. And if I go all the way, you will hear that it's an octave. So it's super useful for creating a bit of detuning. Like here, you know, we have it at 3.6%. But what I actually like to do with this thing sometimes is I don't just see it as an inharmonic parameter. I see it as an extra oscillator that I can kind of put an octave above or an octave below. So if I want some inharmonics, yeah, I turn it on and I put it on whatever. But if maybe I don't care about inharmonics, but I put it on 100% and turn it on, and I kind of get this like octave above sort of thing, and it can get super interesting, especially if we mix in the other side. So encourage you to experiment with this. It's kind of cute when you kind of factor in everything together, right? You do like all these modulations, not an absolute preset, but something more interesting, and you involve the Inharmonic knob. It can get really, really interesting, actually. I love this parameter. It's unique, and it's a little bit different than maybe what you expect sometimes, the way it behaves, which is actually cool. It leads to kind of interesting sound design. So let's move on. We looked at this width sort of thing, and actually in the wavetables world, these kinds of things are called shapers. So they kind of take the shape of the wavetable, the original shape, the saw, and they do some DSP on it, and they shape it into something else. So this is a dedicated shaper for width, as we saw. But we also have another shaper after the width, and this is kind of a new thing also in the Kontakt engine. In the past, you couldn't have these two shapers. This is brand new Kontakt technology where there's two shapers in series. You could have one, but you couldn't have two. So we couldn't do this thing where we have the width and the extra shaper. And this extra shaper has a lot of stuff inside. Various algorithms that interact with the sound in different ways. I encourage you to just kind of explore, and you will see what they do. So this is kind of like a syncing algorithm, and there's different ones. Sync 1, 2, 3, and 4. And yeah, as you can see, they kind of each one is a bit like, I don't know, there's different violence involved here. Like here it's okay, it takes the triangle and you can see that it starts to double it, and triple it and quadruple it, whatever. Basically it goes up in pitch, like there's more cycles, but you also see that there's a little bit of bending involved eventually. And if you kind of go to sync 2 and sync 3, you can see that, yeah, it's a little bit different, right? It's not just doing, not just doubling the frequency. And there's bending here, and there's all sorts of stuff that you can do. Some of them are quite odd, and it also really depends on the waveform. Look what this one does to the triangle, but to a saw, it's quite different. You see, like it's wavetable dependent, and it's kind of curious to play around with it. Encourage you to try. There's also just like some of them are even, there's a plain saturator. It also kind of really cool to know. There's saturators and distortions. So this one a little bit, you can see it kind of bends it in a distortion sort of way. So again, experiment, yeah. And just to show one last favorite of mine, this seesaw is super weird. I don't know, it's weird. I love it. It's really strange. You should try automating this stuff. So let's hear it for a sec. Just. quite interesting, and don't forget that you can involve everything. So imagine involving the seesaw, involving the Inharmonic, involving the width, giving some, just some modulation to all of them from LFOs, from envelopes, and you get the idea how this starts to kind of interact together. But we haven't reached the main point yet, and this is absolutely new in Kontakt. Previously in the past, Kontakt instruments could build with wavetables, and maybe I just showed you one new feature. Okay, there's this new shaper, but whatever, right? But this is not whatever. Now with Kontakt's wavetable engine, you can design instruments, and that's what we have done, that make use of FM synthesis and also phase modulation synthesis, which is kind of similar to FM but leads to a different sound. And this is with a built-in oscillator that is kind of attached to the wavetable oscillator, a little bit similar to the Inharmonic oscillator, but an additional one that is paired with it and has these algorithms that you see in this menu that are available. So the first one being that FM, and you can see that it's FM to the wavetable. It means that the Modulation Osc is providing modulation to the wavetable. You can also do it the other way around. You can have the wavetable providing FM to the Modulation Osc. You can have self-feedback, where basically the Modulation Osc's other parameters are kind of not in play, but like the frequency parameter and stuff like that, and the wave. But basically the wavetable is kind of providing frequency modulation to itself, and then you have the same with the phase modulation. So wavetable to the built-in oscillator to the wavetable, self PM, and two more modes at the very end. Ring modulation, kind of self-explanatory, just ring mod between the wavetable and the built-in modulation oscillator. But one that I really like, it's the mod mix. And this allows you to use this built-in oscillator basically as an additional oscillator inside this algorithm. So it basically mixes in this modulation oscillator. It doesn't do modulation between them, it mixes it into the signal. So just as an example, let's say I'm playing quite simply now. Well, maybe let's go back to a complete init. So we have our sine wave that is playing. Well, we have two sine waves. Hang on. Now we have just the wavetable layer, the sine wave playing. And if I go now into mod mix, I still didn't mix in anything. Let's maybe first set up this frequency. And let's do an octave lower just for the example. Pull that up. And we have an extra oscillator that we can mix in. Just like I did here, it's cool to use it as a sub-oscillator. Maybe you don't use a sine wave in that case. There's different waves here. We don't have a saw in a square, kind of oddly, but we have TX waveforms that kind of mimic that behavior. You can use one of these. Maybe let's go down to 24. So if I click and drag, it's maybe a little bit hard to reach the exact spots. But if you shift click, then you have much more granular control. So as you can see, I'm moving much more slower for the example, and I can hit -24. And then we have 2 octaves below. And then again, the other modes are quite interesting. So I really like the phase modulation. And when we are in our other modes, it becomes even more useful to go over here and set a different tuning than semitones. I guess when we are just flat out mixing the oscillator, we kind of want a very clear semitone relation to the original oscillator. Maybe not, whatever, I'm just saying. But when we're doing stuff like FM and and phase modulation, maybe we want to have a different relation. So the 3 available ones are, as you saw, semitone, XY, which is a division of the incoming frequency. So if this is on 1/2, it means that the modulation oscillator will play at 1/2 the incoming frequency. So if I play this C note, the modulation oscillator will get this C note. And again, same thing, if I go twice above and whatnot. I think it sounds really good, and don't forget that you can, of course, also modulate this. So you can modulate the depth and you can modulate the frequency, both with the built-in modulators, so with the envelope or with the LFOs. So mod depth and mod frequency, it refers to these two. And then it can get quite interesting. We have a few snapshots that showcase this, where let's say the depth is opening as you play the sound, and it's quite beautiful. And again, you can do that also with external modulation. So super interesting altogether. I think this is really the basic thing here about the wavetable. Just all this together, that you have all this extensive collection, really a huge collection of shapes. I cannot overstate how many. Just it's incredible. We really took the time, you know, and we tried to really give you really high quality wavetables in single cycles, and not just filler to say that we have a huge amount. Really cool things, high quality, good synthesis, good variety, and good quality throughout. And then together with all these parameters, I mean, I didn't talk about the tune and fine and pan. I guess these are self-explanatory. But yeah, so the way the Inharmonic kind of interacts with it, the way the width interacts with it, the way the shapers interact, and the way the extra oscillator interacts, you can already get a really cool, deep and evolving sound, intricate and interesting sound design-wise. Yeah, so that's basically the wavetable layer. Each layer, though, also has a small kind of built-in effects section on the layer. In the wavetable layer, that includes a stereo spread effect and a filter. On the other layer, you already see that it also has the filter, but it has something a little bit different going on. But this stereo effect also adds a little bit to the magic. It really detunes and widens the sound. I really like to use this, especially when the wavetable layer is kind of more in the background. So you have, I mean, that's just one sound design idea, right? So you have something really prominent and in your face coming from the sample layer, and the wavetable layer is has this spread going on, and it's maybe a little more backgroundish. So even if, let's just really quickly. So this would be the wavetable layer without the stereo. With the stereo, it just gets thrown into the background in a little bit. And then together. Remember, this is all with a closed filter, no effects, no enveloping, just wanted to showcase the raw sound. And then the last thing, both layers have this, as you saw, filter, which helps you sculpt the sound a little bit. It's super useful. Also, yeah, when you want to you have these two layers, you're not necessarily playing this mix game. You want them both playing together, but you want to fine tune where they are in the mix. It's extra useful actually on the sampler side, where the samples are sometimes a little bit purposely more grainy and dirty sometimes. But on the wavetable as well, maybe you want to kill some of the low end, or maybe actually you want to kill some of the sizzle and have the sizzle coming from the sample side. It's all up to you. It helps you place them. It's super powerful. It's very useful in creating snapshots and working with this thing. So we did layer A. I already feel like I talked way too much, and I'm going to talk a lot more, but that's just, yeah, there's a lot to show. Layer B, the sample layer. Now, I really love me some layer A and some synthesis, but I have to say layer B, yeah, this has really personally my soul in it. It's samples that I've sampled over maybe 20 years, and yeah, just throughout all these years, sessions that go back to when I started making music, and I had yeah, various hardware synths. It goes back to a lot of things that I had, digital and analog as well, and all the way to today. And every few years I would make a huge sampling session and stash the samples, save them for a day when I would make an instrument again, and this is that day. And all these incredible samples went in there. So again, lots of digital synths, lots of analog synths, like hardware I'm saying, lots of Eurorack, just tons and tons of Eurorack. It's crazy how much Eurorack went into this. These things mixed together, crazy sampling sessions with Machina Plus, sending MIDI to them, and yeah, doing all sorts of stuff. But also, a lot of the Ocean Swift previous synths. So a lot of our synths from the Sonic Core Scope DSP platform, really high quality synthesis going on that platform, and a lot of our stuff from our previous VST plugins. So even one of the categories, it's called that way, Phenom. which is a homage to our Polyphenom synth. So there's a lot of, you kind of see it by the preset names. Phenomist, Entermana, which references our synth enterprise. Defiant, which was our actually award-winning. It won some freebie of the year award, I don't know, somewhere. Our Defiant synthesizer. So all of that is basically in this section. And what we did here is they're samples, but they're basically molded to be oscillators. So everything is kind of looping and behaves as if it was an oscillator that you can just load up and play. Some of them are really not, let's say, dynamic in the sense that, yes, they are literally oscillators that I sampled like straight up, but some of them are a little bit more dynamic and evolving, but we try to really keep it consistent. They look, they loop perfectly, and yeah, they are oscillators in the end. So even if they have movement, that movement eventually kind of flows, and it's not like something that evolves from point A to B and then just, yeah, I don't know, reaches its conclusion and is not useful anymore if you sustain a key. That is, I guess, my point. You can sustain anything here. Let's quickly look. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's talk about the user at the very end here, because you can also do it with the wavetables. The first one we already saw. Just basic cycles, the exact same as the sample section. The analog section is just, as I mentioned before, lots of Eurorack, lots of analog synths. And you can hear some of them are like super clean. You wouldn't even maybe guess that they're analog. But some of them have that grit, even this one. So you can sense a little bit of that analog vagueness and beauty and randomness sometimes. And the thing is here, so this, for example, I think it's a Eurorack, sampling of a Eurorack oscillator, and of course in Eurorack, I mean, not everything, but most things are monophonic, and here you don't have that limitation. So you can play these beautiful oscillators in a polyphonic way, which you couldn't do if you just had the module, like like in my huge setup here, I have all these modules, but I can only play them monophonically. And now I can finally experience these sounds in a polyphonic sort of way. So that's also part of the appeal. So lots of analog. Some of them, again, yeah, like simple things like saws and squares, but you also have a lot of interesting tones. And it goes on a little bit. I mean, we don't need to hear every single sound, but let's just, I mean, you also have all these like analog unison, you know, with like really kind of things going on, where multiple oscillators were recorded together, kind of detuned and with like, yeah, various crazy parameters. So that's basically the analog section. Just explore it, obviously. And then we go to the digital section, which is actually quite, it's probably the most varied section over here. It has just lots of stuff. It ranges from like really old, like, I don't know, I have no idea where it's even from some old Romplers from early 90s or something, in mid 90s. So stuff like that. But also, it starts to get into kind of like odd territory where you have things that I sampled in a sort of layered way, where basically it could be that you load this one pad sample here, but it's actually a layer of like 5 things. So you have that as well in this category. And yeah, also simple digital tones, similar to the tones that are in the analog section, where it's just like a really firm tone. And maybe this sample here is a good example where we can show some of the synthesis that goes on in the sample section as opposed to the wavetable section. In the sample section, you can do a little bit less, right? Because the wavetable, it's created in real time. It's just like, it's a table that is being manipulated. Here we have basically the sample, so there's not as much real-time control, but there are things that are important. So aside from tune, fine, and pan, which we will not go over, I just quickly want to go over the sample start. So this particular sample, you hear that it has a kind of interesting attack, but maybe you don't want this attack, or you want it to be a little bit dynamic. So if you just use the start, we can kind of make the sample start a little bit further in the sample, and then we don't have this attack. Or we can just set it to kind of be random, and depending on how much we send it, maybe some hits have the attack, maybe some hits don't. So even that provides a lot of expressive dynamicness. I just put it on a little bit of random here. Maybe even this is enough for some lead, right? Like it already has some expressiveness, add in a filter. And you get the idea. So just wanted to kind of stop on this. But anyways, a lot of tones here, some vocal stuff, it's all but stuff that's coming from digital sources. Let's take the random off for a second. And yeah, again, a lot of layered things. And stuff from reactors, stuff from microcell, which is a Eurorack module, like reactor ensembles that we created that are doing like a super saw. And so on and so on. Some of them are quite gritty, some of them are cleaner, some of them are a little bit detuned. You know, there's just a lot of selection here. It depends on the sound that you need. Yeah, I think I overdid it already, but I wanted to show that this section has a lot of, maybe let's just show the microcells really quickly, because they're weird. They're weird. Such weird samples. Maybe you hate them, I don't know. I like them. They're detuned and messed up, but they still kind of somehow hold the fundamental together. Very, very Mellotronish. Alright, so that was the digital section. And jumping way over to the other side of life, we have the organic section. And this is just instruments, sampled instruments or people. So it even has some of my former teammates from the Kontakt team at Native Instruments. So shout out to Elpeniki and to Michael, who contributed their voice to this instrument. But we also have a bunch of additional samples here. We have samples contributed by Stefano Maccarelli that makes also amazing instruments, so check out his things. And some samples contributed by Alessandro Mastroianni from Sonor Cinematic. And this is kind of an interesting category. It's a category of friends, let's say. And it has, some violins and some vocals, as you can see, and some keys that were created from vocals, like processed in a certain way. Remember that I said everything in the end is an oscillator here. Samples from my own Shruti box. There's a clarinet. There's maybe not tons of stuff in here, but it's still quite varied and interesting, especially when you mix it with other things. We can quickly listen. And remember, since these things are oscillators, most of them, they don't probably retain the envelope behavior of the instruments that were sampled here, but they retain the sonic sort of tone of these instruments, right? So a bassoon. hear that in this category especially, and this is a little bit by design, not all the samples are like the cleanest thing ever and like the most kind of sort of punchy and precise thing ever. They're a little bit kind of weird sometimes and interesting, and they have some character to it. I don't want to say melotronish about every single sample here, but some of them are. But some of them are, they're not dirty or messed up, and they're all in tune, don't get me wrong. But they have some interesting characters to it. We try to at least keep a little bit, so. And shout out to El Paniki, that's her voice. So this is what I meant by just taking a voice, processing it a certain way that it turns into an oscillator but retains the something from the original tonality. So there's a bunch of those, really kind of different tones and different flavors. And yeah, and some of them, like I said, are weird, like this mic key 5 is a little bit funky, and so on and so on. So that's basically this organic category. So a bunch of vocals, a few violins, and some like bassoons and some other things. Yeah, really cool to mix. Basically, I really like taking stuff from the vocals and mixing it in with the wavetable. That's kind of the shtick that I use with this category. And then, yeah, like I said, there's the Phenom category, which is like a homage to our previous synths, and it has a lot of interesting things in here, I think, as well. Like evolving, weird sort of tones, but also some pretty clean ones. Like, it depends. Yeah, again, just you have to go over the sound. Some of them are like super solid, just that one tone, and some of them are like grungy and evolving and bending and weird. And so on. There's a few here that I really like. There's just so much sound here. I think it was like the Atmotone stuff. Now, as you see, there's no additional modulation going on right now, but just these samples are a little bit evolving. There's movement in the original sample. And so on and so on. I think, yeah, maybe enough of that. And then the last category, the noise category. So there's not just white and pink and brown, you have all that, but you have all sorts of kind of colored noises, analog, yeah, stuff coming from Eurorack. It's just colored in a certain way. So I don't think we need to play all the noises, but you also have some filtered ones where, yeah, they're a little bit kind of, it's white noise, but no longer white. And you also have some tune samples. Which are basically playable. So samples that started as noise got processed in a certain way where some harmonics are emphasized and they became tune samples. And then there's a few really funky things. So a generator, kids. And maybe here is a good example to show. So I mentioned that you can maybe, you have the full spectrum of most of these samples, and maybe filtered a little bit and cleaned up, obviously. But maybe from the water here, you want just like a certain sort of frequency band. So you can turn on the filter. and save just the upper end, or if you're so inclined, you can save more the lower side. So that really helps to sculpt the sound is what I wanted to show. So I guess these are the two sections. We went through the whole thing. One last thing is you also have the user category. You can basically, I didn't prepare a droppable sample, but you can just drag and drop samples over here, and you will load your own samples. Remember that the wavetable side, obviously you should be loading things that make sense as wavetables. Wavetable files basically that you already have from somewhere else. Kontakt takes 2048. Let me see if we actually wrote that here. So yeah, we have it in the tips somewhere. Let me find it. So this is a good segue. You can go over to the options page, and we have some additional tips, just basically cool things that you can do with the synth, but also, here. So the Wavetable engine expects frame sizes of 2048 samples for ideal accurate interpretation of the sample. And this is kind of a known thing. I don't want to give you a lecture about wavetables over here, but if you already have wavetable samples on your computer and work with other wavetable synths, that is probably not foreign to you. And the format that is used over here, if you forget it, you can look over here at the options. We'll get back to the options section in a second, but I just wanted to show that information about like the samples and the user stuff, it's all in there in the help section. So going back to the main page, maybe let's clean this up again. After the sound, it's basically generated. Maybe you realized already the potential by kind of seeing what I've been showing and listening to those different source sounds and different ways that you can manipulate them. And you can imagine how you can mix them already together and get into really lots of interesting sonic results. Obviously, that's not the end of the story. After these sounds are mixed, they go together into a filter section. You have the normal parameters, cutoff, resonance. You have keyboard tracking for external kind of additional external modulation for the filter. And you also have a saturation stage, which I find personally really useful. Just give a little bit more grit to the sound. Especially, you're mixing these two things, you're filtering together, and then you're saturating them together. It kind of, all this process kind of glues everything together, and you can get something that sounds like it actually, it gels. It basically belongs together in a certain sense. So the filter itself, you have, all the basic things that you would expect. Ladders, state variable filters, just low pass, band pass, high pass, some interesting ones like the Daft filter, which I think sounds really good. The filter from NI's Pro 53 is also here, and you also have like some funkier ones like phaser and valve filters available to you. Moving on to the internal modulation section, let's say. Really quick note on this. I mean, the things here, there's nothing really peculiar here. So the envelopes, you have amp, filter, and mod envelope, which we already looked at, that you can send a module envelope to different destinations. Quick note on how all the envelopes work. And this is also new in Kontakt. You couldn't do this in the past, or even if you could somehow hack it together, it was really a chore, and it probably wouldn't behave exactly as the user expects. But now we can make, when we build instruments with Kontakt, as we did here, we can create instruments that have slopes on the envelopes. And this really helps get certain sounds right, and percussive stuff, especially like if you're doing like bass hits or even like drum hits or effects or plucks or leads that need to be a certain way. Just being able to control the slopes of these envelopes, it's really on point for certain sound design. And this is a completely new kind of feature with Kontakt. You couldn't do this before, and I don't think there are any other instruments as of now of me making this video that have this envelope set up within these instruments. So I just wanted to make that point. It's not new in the synthesis world, but it's new in the Kontakt instruments world. So it's a level up for the platform, this feature that is available in this instrument. So that's it for the envelopes. Nothing really, the rest is standard. Attack, decay, sustain, release. LFOs, again, it's pretty standard. I will stop only on LFO X, but just to quickly say that you have 5 of them, and that's probably even overkill. And they can be routed to a bunch of things. So you can route the destination to the mix of the two layers, to the amp individually of each layer, to the amp of both layers, which is not the same as mix. Mix is like this guy, right? But amplitude of both of them. You can do the pitch individually or together. You can do the pan individually or together. You can do the filter cutoff. And then you can do a bunch of the wavetable parameters like the morph, inharmonic, width, shaper, mod depth, and mod frequency. So these are 4 LFOs, 1 to 4. They are all identical, exactly the same, exactly as you would expect in pretty much every LFO that you've ever seen. So sine, triangle, saw, random, all these shapes. You have rate control. You can sync the rate to the BPM. And you have bipolar depth control. And you have the starting phase of the LFO. So if you want to flip, for example, the way a saw kind of affects the sound. And retrigger, which will retrigger the LFO with each new note. Again, just to emphasize, all this information, everyone, you can just hover over, and it's over here in the info pane. Okay, so 4 LFOs that are identical, and then you have the 5th LFO, LFO X. It's similar in some ways. It has 2 interesting quirks. The first being that the waveform is actually sort of not set in stone. Every click on this wave knob generates a new waveform by mixing together internally a bunch of other waveforms. So you have like a saw square and a saw, and you have some stuff going on internally. Creates a new waveform. It's in some ways it's similar to putting the other waveforms on random, but it's a little bit more deliberate because it's a little bit more pulsating. You see, because you will see when you play around with this, because there is a square involved inside. Most of these clicks will end up with something that is sort of pulsating. Let's try it on. So we have this sine over here. Maybe let's try it on the pitch. And let's go for like, you see it's pulsating. Tugu, tugu, tugu. And then I click on the wave. And of course, if you now sync this to your tempo, you can get something that makes rhythmically makes sense to your composition. Now I did say, okay, every click generates a new wave, but obviously once it's set, like you don't lose your wave. So if you click, you like it now, you want this, you save your snapshots on this, you reload the snapshot, obviously you will still have the wave that you created. So only a new click will create it. But once you click, that's it. So, YOLO, really YOLO, click it and yeah. So that's the one cool thing about this LFO. Kind of lets you, it encourages you to experiment a little bit in your sound design, and it also gives you a way to have something a little bit like pulsating sort of vibe. And the second cool thing is it has a fade in. These guys don't have it. And it even goes up to 10 seconds. So you can fade in this LFO. You can hold a note for really long. And it'll sort of fade in its activity, like it really depends also on what it's set on over here, like how that fade behaves. But it's quite interesting, and it can also lead to quite interesting results where you can start a certain way and slowly evolve. I guess that's the whole point of this synth. The whole point of this synth is to slowly evolve, or not slowly, or however, but to evolve, let's say. All right, we made it through the entire first page. I think that's actually most of the synth. One last thing I want to show here, because this is quite cute, and I won't give all our secrets away. I will only show one of them. So this synthesizer actually has a bunch of Easter eggs, and they appear in various ways. So for example, I mean, you saw me click the logo here. I wouldn't consider that an Easter egg, but different things can appear on the GUI depending on different actions that you take or on different dates of the year. Usually they will appear here, but not always. I will show you one of them because I also want to give kudos to a to a certain person. So if you go over here and let me find where we really, okay, this is one of them. So if I go here and pick the preset called Standing on the Shoulder of Dragons, whoa! First of all, it's a very nice preset, but you see this little guy appear over here. Now I don't know which of you watching this video knows him or not, but this is Mario, Mr. Evil Dragon. He's basically the guru, the authority on Kontakt online and on communities. Super important person for the way the Kontakt ecosystem grew, and yeah, just in helping out people build Kontakt instruments. He was a teammate of mine at Native Instruments for a number of years. We're still really good friends, and just to say, big shout out, bro. Like, no way I could have built this instrument without you. I'm standing on the shoulder of dragons just by giving you guys this overview. So huge thanks, Mario. And thanks for also being a good sport and letting me kind of put your avatar over here inside my synth. And how does this work? So if you go on this side and you choose the table named Evil, and you go on this side and you choose the sample named Dragon, then you get Mr. Evil Dragon. Notice that if I now go away, so I'm going over to another sample and it's gone. If I go back, oh, Dragon is back. If I go away, I go back, he's back. So only when you're an Evil Dragon, you get to see Mr. Evil Dragon. And I wanted to show this one, give the shout out, but there's tons of other Easter eggs inside this synthesizer. Let's see if you can find them. I hope you find them funny and unique. All right, so we took care of this page. This is really the gist of the synthesis. We still have the effects page. Now here I won't go into every single parameter and of every single effect, but I want to give kind of the gist of how this thing works. So basically you have, yeah, maybe let's go back to the init. So you have 4 effect slots, and they are kind of set in stone-ish in the sense that the first slot is a creative slot, the second slot is a modulation slot, the third slot is a delay slot, and the fourth slot is a reverb slot. It just kind of, we found that it's a kind of cool way to kind of keep things dynamic, but at the same time keep a certain flow that makes sense and that is very kind of easy to follow along, and it's also leads to kind of cool synthesis that it flows in this sort of way. The creative effects, you have a selection, ring mod, freak, so you have simple things and known things, so a ring modulator. But really to say, all these effects, some of them are like super high quality, a lot of them are really new to Kontakt, maybe from the last few months or the last year, some of them even newer than that. And they are really the commercial effects that Native Instruments is actually selling. So Freak is this very cool sort of ring and amplitude modulator and does funky shit, you know, and it's like super interesting. And it's embedded and included right here in the creative section of this instrument. So a lot of really cool things. You have fuzz and big fuzz, which are distortion effects. You have screamer, which is a little bit of an older effect, but it's still a really cool distortion effect. Dirt, again, this is a full commercial effect from Native Instruments. It's actually embedded into here. Bite, again, really elaborate lo-fi lo-fi effect basically, but it does so much more than that. And a built-in gator as well, which is actually has some kind of nice quirks to it. You can flip the way you can turn off and on the gator for, so let's put both sections. Yeah, we are now hearing both. Let's say, okay, sine wave is cool. Let's go down 24 semitones here. So we actually hear that we have 2 different sounds. And if we quickly go on the gator, we can turn the gator on for only one side. And you can even see it here on the meters. It's only working on the wavetable. Now it's working on both, but one of them is flipped. So now they're the same. And now it's flipped. So when the wavetable is actually on this position, the sample is on this position and vice versa. And you can get a really sort of pulsating, or not necessarily pulsating, it depends on what you put here. As you can see, all these built-in effects, they have mini presets that you can start with. So I just really quickly wanted to show the gator because it's a little bit interesting, and you can also randomize the gator, and you can actually flip the entire thing as drawn, and you can do some interesting things. Moving on to the mod section, again, you have a bunch of like really high-end effects from Native Instruments. This they sell as the mod pack, so choral, phases, and flare. And you have some more traditional effects, chorus, phaser, and flanger. Obviously, the more elaborate effects are a little bit more CPU. It's nothing really like it's not a huge difference. Like you can live with it for sure, but just saying. And then you have a really interesting sort of Rhodes like vibrato chorus. And yeah, each of these obviously has a lot of snapshots that you can load and you can start with. A lot of really cool starting points, all of them. So depending on what you load, obviously if you load something like a phaser, it's not that many knobs, there's not so much, so there's less snapshots, but the really more elaborate effects like, yeah, phases, for example, you have a ton of snapshots that you can work with. Moving on to the delay section, again, you have choices, replica, twin, and cyca delay. They each behave a little bit differently. Replica is actually, so you see there are three basic kind of delay plugins. But Replica actually has a bunch of modes inside. So it has a modern, analog, tape, vintage, and diffusion. They all behave a little bit differently. They have different controls. So if I'm in modern mode, you see certain controls over here, like, I don't know, depth and rate. If I go to diffusion, you see amount and size, and yeah, just different things. And this diffusion mode is actually super, super interesting. It's basically like a crazy reverb in the end. Reverb that can go really funky on the feedback and really, really interesting. I will show you in a second the round reverb. It uses the same algorithm or a similar one to the diffusion algorithm in Replica. Super nice and a bit different. It's a dedicated reverb, but this diffusion mode can go into crazy feedback, and which Realm cannot. So I'm just saying this is, I really love this diffusion mode. But again, so not just Replica, you also have a twin delay, which allows you to do just a really basic stereo delay where both sides are different, and you can also sync the pre-delays to the tempo, and you have the cross and everything, so you, again, also an interesting delay. And the cyca delay, which is also super interesting and quite funky because it also not only does delay, but it also messes with the pitch and the reverse and with the way the delays are, yeah, basically pitched and played. So you can kind of like reverse and pitch them, and it gets kind of really, really weird, just as an example. So you get these really kind of so you can do all these psychedelic things, but you don't have to, not necessarily. You can also do just a lot of cool regular, it's just an interesting delay, basically. It can do a lot of cool things. Encourage you to explore them all because they all have their different use cases. And then, last but not least, obviously, you have the reverb. You have, let's start with the plate because it's the different one, so it kind of mimics a plate reverb. It doesn't have that many controls, but I really like the sound of this one as well. If you need something, you don't need a lot of controls and you need a certain sound, you can definitely grab the plate. There's the galloys, which is a really traditional sort of reverb, high quality one with two kind of room types, room and hall, and a bunch of controls. But then really the cherry on top of the cake, the round reverb. I love this reverb. I love how the way it sounds in general. I love the way it sounds in this instrument. I freaking love the init preset. It's just so nice, you know. It's like sometimes I feel like it's cheating, you know. It's like, hey, let's just do whatever and put the init preset of Realm on it and it will be amazing. I don't know. So I really like this reverb. Again, it has 3 modes inside, grounded, airy, and cosmic. They each sound a little bit different, and the diffusion and the decay and just the way the reverb works is a little bit different. All have their different use cases. I don't know, somehow, maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just subjective and has no basis in any sort of reality, but I just really love this airy mode. And again, you have a lot of presets on this reverb, so really to explore, and you can get really, really long decays. Look at this. 200 seconds basically, and just really crazy diffusion and big size. You get really, really beautiful reverbs with this round reverb. So this is the effect section. Again, super, you can get really creative with it. There's a lot that you can do. The effects are all elaborate. There's a full kind of world of exploration just by exploring something like phases. And then you pair it with a replica, and you pair it with a realm, and you put something like freak on it if it makes sense for certain sounds, and it can get quite crazy. Let's go back to our absolute, or our realm will be decaying forever. So that's the synthesis. Those are the effects. The last page that we quickly jumped to a minute ago or earlier is the options page. I was clicking here, so maybe let's start with the manual. So there's a built-in, so the manual for this instrument, it's this built-in manual plus all the help tags. We decided not to go with like an external manual because people don't really open it, and that's one reason. And the second reason was we wanted the information to just be there for you now and not on some web page and not on some PDF, and you don't need to take that extra step. There's not a lot to learn about the synth. Everything is intuitive and everything is covered here in the help tags, but some additional notes of information are still here in the manual. Even this bit of information that's like the parameter helps is available in the info pane. We remind you that things actually cost processing power, so if I'm not using the filter, I'm not using this filter, I'm not using everything that you see that has a power basically that you can turn off. Effects that you don't use, just turn them off. Inharmonic you don't use, turn it off. The lo-fi here, not using, turn it off. You can conserve and save a little bit of CPU. It could be important. Obviously there's a wide variety of systems that are going to be using this instrument. So again, a little bit manual. You have a small tips sections here. We just want it to be cute. So we give you some ideas and some things that you can do here as far as just quick tips about the instrument. Last thing is the credits page. I mean, you can go with the menu. You can also scroll these 3 pages here. We just say thanks, and no need to dwell on this page too much. Last thing to show. 2 more things. Let's start with the play mode. Polyphonic, mono, or legato. Basically, with legato mode, for example, you can turn on the porta, and you'll have this classic legato behavior where the envelopes are not restarted. In mono mode, the envelopes are restarted. And in polyphonic mode, it's fully polyphonic. Maybe for most sounds that want to use portamento or glide, poly mode doesn't make sense, but sometimes it does. So you could if you want. The controls are separated, so it's just over here. External modulation. So you saw me mention before when we're looking at all these different parameters, like, hey, you can also connect it to external modulation, not just to the envelope and the LFOs. And you have a lot of options over here. So you have basically 4 things: velocity, polyphonic aftertouch, the wheel, and the pitch bend. The pitch bend is the simplest one. You can basically just set the pitch bend range. So from 0, which does nothing, but up to 12 semitones. So for example, opposed to really simple. The wheel, one of the things that it can go into is the mix of the AB. I showed this, I think, in the beginning. This is just an on-off because we thought it would make sense that in all cases, it kind of takes the whole range. Like that's kind of what you want, right? To know exactly where you are in the range, to know that if you're in the middle, you're in the middle. But obviously the rest of the things, if it makes sense, they are bipolar. If not, they are unipolar. You can connect the mod wheel to LFO 1, 2, 3, 4 depth and rate. One thing to note, I know that some of you might find it peculiar, but this is just the way that we had to design this thing. LFO X cannot be externally modulated. So if you want to modulate the rate or the depth of your LFO, if that's important in your patch, you need to use LFO 1 to 4 to do that. But you can, link things to link the mod wheel to the filter, both resonance and cutoff, to a bunch of the wavetable controls, the sample start. Not everything makes sense for everything, of course, like wheel. Polyphonic aftertouch, which is a big showcase of this instrument. It works beautifully. It's in Kontakt. You might have not seen that much polyphonic aftertouch in the past because most instruments are sample based, but this one can be controlled really beautifully real time because we have the wavetable oscillator with its built-in just this built-in Mod Osc, and there's so much that you can do just by going over here. and setting some polyphonic aftertouch to these wavetable parameters. And yeah, you could obviously also set it to the sample pitch. And of course, velocity velocity is by default, it's internally, you don't have control over that. It's internally routed to the volume of the notes that you play, but you can also route it to a bunch of other things, same as the mod wheel basically. A little bit different because the mod wheel can be assigned to this. So you have a lot of external modulation, you have a lot of internal modulation. That's actually kind of the let's say the gist of the modulation here is that's what's different, right? That you have a lot of polyphonic aftertouch, which is not characteristic of a lot of Kontakt instruments. You have these envelopes over here that have these slopes. It might seem like a small feature, but it can mean a lot. That's what makes things sound right, is what I'm trying to say. So this, together with the polyphonic aftertouch, the other external modulation, and not just having those things, not just having polyphonic aftertouch, but having these meaningful destinations, this really, really means a lot. So that's it. Basically, there's two more controls here that are not directly related to the synthesis itself. As you saw, there's this animation here. I think it's beautiful. I love it, but maybe if it annoys you, you can turn it off. It says it here on the bottom, so it turns the animations off. And if you decide to turn it off, and change snapshots and everything, this parameter won't change. So this parameter will only be resaved if you resave the NKI. So you need to kind of resave the NKI itself if you want to keep it always off. It's better this way, right? You don't want it kind of jumping around and turning off and on depending on moving presets. And then the last thing here, again, it's not a synthesis thing per se, but it has to do with the quality of the kind of the interpolation and what's happening inside. And this leads to different sound quality, mostly when you're doing two things. So on the sampler side, when you're really kind of pitching to the extremes, especially to the high extreme. And for the wavetable side is when you're morphing, when you're kind of, let's go into the table with this guy. When you're doing this morphing stuff and it interpolates, so stuff that is like 73.4, and you're moving this really fast, there's a lot of interpolation going on. The higher you go in this interpolation value, the more CPU that it will take. We think that you basically shouldn't really touch this. Draft really doesn't sound that great. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want to use that creatively. But I think it just doesn't sound that great. Most computers should definitely, I don't think should be any problem. You should be able to afford the high mode. That's also our default mode, and that's the mode that we recommend to work. If you find that resources are completely not a problem, everything is amazing, you don't care about the CPU, it just runs amazing, you can just put it on best if you want, and you'll get a little bit more quality in the extremes. You can also set it to best if you're rendering and things like that. But just suffice it to say, the difference in sound quality between draft and high is quite drastic. You will really notice it. But the difference between high and best is not that, really honestly not that great. So you don't need to use best, use high, and you're good to go. So inclined, feel free. All right, that's our instrument. That's Porphyra Hybrid. So just to recap what we wanted to show, right? So there's a lot of new Kontakt features that we're using here. Really powerful kind of blend of this wavetable with the sampler engine, with the huge selection of the samples, with a lot of real-time control and a lot of internal and external modulation. Some of this modulation also involving new Kontakt features as well. Super powerful and extensive effect section with a lot of mini presets that you can work really fast and get creative really quickly. And just the ability to route everything also with external modulation. So that's the synthesizer itself. There's also one more thing to show that about let's say the sounds that you can kind of achieve with this just by browsing the sounds that it comes with. There's so many. There's over 500 sounds. You can browse them in various ways. Kontakt kind of gives you different browsing paradigms. You can browse from here, from the instrument header itself. where it's kind of by categories, or you can go to Kontakt's actual kind of this CX user's experience browser. And then you can also browse by tags. So if you go to Porphyra, and you can see the available tags are highlighted over here, and then let's say you want a synth pad, and you can kind of actually look for certain pads by type, or you can actually browse by character. So let's say I'm really looking for, I want to check out some polyphonic aftertouch, so I can go here, I can click Aftertouch, and then I will have all these sounds. And look, there's 133 presets over here that come with Porphyra that involve polyphonic aftertouch. So it's actually really beautiful. Maybe I can give one quick example. Let's go to it from over here. And let's see this guy, PolyAT Morph example. So this is really a simple sound. It's not something elaborate, but it just shows. We have over here the PolyAT, and it's going to the Wavetable Morph, and solely to that. And as we play, and also the layer, so it's only the Wavetable Layer, so this is just, as the name implies, an example. I will just hold down a simple, what is like C major chord, and yeah, just as I play it, I will change the pressure that I'm applying to the keys. So if I'm playing without any pressure, and now I will change the pressure now first for the higher key, the G note, and then I will change some pressure for the E note and for the C note, and kind of move around. You can also see the notes that I'm holding over here. So all of them together. So this was quite simple, right? It's just doing this very particular simple modulation, but already you can see. So what if I just take that? Super simple. Random delay. I mean, that's already beautiful, right? Let's make this thing cinematic. So when people say cinematic, it's just this, right? That's cinematic. So let's do cinematic. And again, that's just a very simple preset. As I've showed, I just want to stop on this because this is really part of the beauty of this synth. There's so many really cool polyphonic aftertouch snapshots. You see here, even it's manipulating the pitch of one of the layers, so manipulating one but not the other. And you get these really interesting pitch drops. So it's really about exploring all of these different options, how they kind of work together, and you end up with like really expressive, just really expressive things, ideally. So this is all for this video. I would encourage you also to check out the video where I show how this instrument interacts with the Native Instruments Mark III keyboard, which has NKS2 support, which we think we really killed it there. You can really, this entire synth is available basically on the hardware display, every single control, you don't miss any of the controls. Super intuitive. You can work with the hardware, and also, of course, the Mark III keyboards also have the Polyphonic Aftertouch support. And we really feel, I mean, we even put this here. This instrument, it enhances the experience and the immersion so much. We think this instrument really, if you own a Mark III, you need this instrument in your life. But really, I encourage you to watch the dedicated video where I show why you need this instrument in your life if you have the Mark III. So I know this was long. Thanks for watching. Go watch some of the sound examples now, and yeah. I hope you consider purchasing this synth. It was made with a lot of love and a lot of passion and just really years of expertise and knowledge and collecting sounds and all of that. Cool. See you later.